Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Anne-Marie Runfola. By day, I work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is NOAA, bringing communities together to enjoy and protect our special marine places. By night, as a volunteer, I'm the president of the 300 Committee Land Trust of Falmouth, bringing communities together to enjoy and protect our special land and coastal places. I couldn't ask for two more complementary roles, and I really love both of them. So first tonight, I want to say thank you. It took a village to bring this together, and we really thank you for helping make this happen. We have sponsors. Our sponsors are Cape Cod Healthcare, Falmouth Public Schools, the Compact Cape Cod Conservation Trusts, Salt Pond Area's Bird Sanctuaries, and the 300 Committee Land Trust of Falmouth. Thanks to Morris Pond School, our host for tonight's talk, and to the Woods Hole Inn for their support provided to make this program possible. Also to our speaker and moderator and panelists, you'll get to hear from them soon, and to the dedicated and passionate 300 Committee staff, board, and volunteers, and also our fellow land trusts working on behalf of our Falmouth community. Salt Pond Area's Bird Sanctuaries, Oyster Pond Restoration Trust, the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and Orenda. And now I'm thrilled to introduce you to our speaker, Rand Wentworth. Rand and his wife have chosen to share their time and talents in the Boston area for these past few years, and we've benefited greatly already from their decision. Many of us in the Massachusetts Land Trust world have had the pleasure of hearing Rand speak at 2 local land trust conferences, where he shared his expertise and illustrated the importance of storytelling in our work. I also participated in a negotiations course he offered last year at the Land Trust Alliance National Conference, and I'm hoping to help with some win-win deals in our community. I'm ready. Our team just has to let me at it, so Leonard, wherever you are. Our conversations with Rand at these events helped us bring him here tonight. He's probably afraid that he'll never shake us off, and he's right. Rand is currently on the faculty of the Harvard Kennedy School and teaches leadership in environmental conflicts. He serves as the Louis Bacon Senior Fellow in Environmental Leadership at the Center for Public Leadership and is on the faculty of the Harvard Senior Executive Fellows. From 2002 to 2016, Rand served as the president of the Land Trust Alliance, a national conservation organization based in Washington, D.C. that serves as the leader for 1,100, count them, land trusts, with 8,000 staff, 16,000 board members, I love these stats, and 4.6 million members, and he now serves as president emeritus. Rand has had a huge impact on land conservation and land trusts in the United States. During his leadership, among many other accomplishments, land trusts doubled the annual pace of conservation in the United States and have now protected over 56 million acres. The Land Trust Alliance created a national accreditation system and built a university for land conservation. Before joining the Land Trust Alliance, Rand served as the founding director of the Atlanta office of the Trust for Public Land, and prior to his career in conservation, he was president of a commercial real estate development company based in Atlanta, where he received numerous awards. At a workshop a year ago, Rand shared the story of his transition from land developer to land conservationist. I've retold this story multiple times as it illustrates the importance of nature and our connections to it. Maybe he'll share it tonight, but whatever he shares, I guarantee by the end of the session, we'll be entertained, challenged, and inspired to act. You're in for a treat. Rand Wentworth.
All right. It's great to see you. Good to be with you tonight. I'm going to tell a story at the request of the 300 Committee about myself, and it's actually a story of the biggest mistake I ever made. A little history about myself. My family roots are in Minnesota, and during the Great Depression, my grandfather was a Swedish farmer. A hailstorm came and just ripped apart all of his crops. The bank foreclosed on his farm, And my mother and the rest of the family were homeless. And while my mother was growing up, lived in 14 different people's houses. So the hailstorm was one thing. I was born in a hurricane in Key West. My father was in the Navy. And the night before my wedding day, a tornado ripped through my yard. So I took nature really seriously long before any talk about climate change. So tonight I want to just, I brought a couple pictures. Now, that's me. I'm about 6 years old, and that's my sister Wendy, who lives in Connecticut. She was my best friend, and she still is my best friend. I was just talking to her earlier today. And we were perched there above the, that's in the background is Lake Superior. I only have 83 family photographs to show you this morning. So I was blessed to have parents who took us out camping all the time. Partly because we didn't have any money, and so putting up a tent was a great way to have a family vacation. We'd go out to see the national parks, probably like a lot of you. And probably like many of you, I was running around catching frogs and turning over rocks and looking for salamanders and climbing trees. That was my life as a kid. And that's, that's in my bones, that my earliest memories are being out with the fresh smell of the wild. My father was transferred to New York City when I was pretty young and bought a house in New Jersey. I was kind of shocked from going from Minnesota to New Jersey. But every Sunday after church, my father would take me to a place they called the Great Swamp, just 25 miles due west of the Empire State Building. Now, after church, I would come, and this is at the end of March. Anybody know what this is? Who got that? Leonard, 10 points. That's a skunk cabbage. So for 4 months, the soil has been completely frozen. The skunk cabbage is in this frozen earth. It's covered over with snow. And yet, through chemical heat, it has somehow, it's not heliotropic, right, because there's no sun down there, but it has decided that it's warm enough, and it starts melting the snow so it can poke its hopeful head up towards the sky. So this was proof to me of the resurrection, right? So this is the Great Swamp. It was a wild and wonderful place. I would climb up these white pine trees to the very top, just where you could, as a kid, sway without the tree breaking, but I was just part of the wind, just rolling. There were raccoons and great blue heron and kingfisher and skunks and raccoon, all kinds of great blue heron. This was a place where I was completely alive. As an 8, 9-year-old, this was the most fun in my week. And my father, I credit him with, he was a scout and he just had us out in the woods all the time. Well, one day I came home from school and this was the front page of the newspaper. Jetport plan unveiled. Now, in New York metropolitan politics, the most powerful entity is not the mayor or the council or the governor, it's the Port Authority. They control everything, bridges, tunnels, huge amount of money. And they had decided the next JFK airport was going to be in my Great Swamp. I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean? That the 3,000 acres of the swamp, the heart of the swamp, would be drained, would be filled, would be covered with tarmac, would become runways, hotels, gas stations, fast food places. I didn't know what to think. This was my heart place. But then there was a lady in the neighborhood named Helen Finsky. And Helen quietly visited some of the neighbors and said, what if we each pitched in some money and we buy this land before the Port Authority gets there? And sure enough, people started writing checks just quietly, and they quietly assembled the different farms and parcels. And once she had assembled it all, she said, now it's conserved. But the Port Authority of New York has the power of eminent domain. So as they said, thank you very much for doing all this work for us. Now all the land is assembled, and we'll just condemn this property. But Helen Finsky is a sly fox. She got on a train, went down to Washington, D.C., met with Representative Frelinghuysen, who's a Republican, back when, you know, Republicans didn't question the idea that they would be for clean water, clean air, natural parks. And there are still Republicans who hold that it's not safe for them to talk about. She met with Representative Frelinghuysen, and she said, I have 3,000 acres I'm prepared to donate to the people of America. If you will make it a National Wildlife Refuge. He takes her to meet the director of the National Wildlife Service and says the same thing. They then all go to see the Secretary of the Interior. The Secretary of the Interior says, deal. So now the property is to be transferred to the federal government. What's the one entity that the New York Port Authority cannot condemn? The federal government. So I looked at it and thought, this is extraordinary. This Helen Finsky, who at the time called herself, quote, she called herself just a housewife, outmaneuvers the most powerful men in the New York metropolitan area. And I thought that was really cool, right? So as a high school student, I volunteered. They started a land trust. First they got together just to stop the airport, but they said, well, we've got a good thing going here. Why don't we just become a land trust and go about protecting this beautiful part of New Jersey. And it became the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. So all of this is good. This was part of me. Now you know a lot about my history, my past. Now the mistake. So it's pretty clear who I am. It is clear to me now. But what happened when I went to business school and I watched my friends go work for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and all this stuff. And so I took a job, the highest paying job, which was in Atlanta, Georgia, which I'd never been to. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to become a real estate developer. Don't ask me why. I just said I'm going to do that. And this is the kind of thing we would build in suburban Atlanta. Office towers, business parks, shopping centers, all kinds of things. And I was going up through the ranks. My job was initially that before we would buy property for this development, which is called Crown Point, I would go out on a weekend and walk the property to make sure that we understood what the property was like. Where there was rock, where there was springs and water, where we might have construction problems. And I remember the day that I walked this property, there were magnificent, giant white oak tree. And at the base of the white oak tree was a clear spring just coming right out of the earth. And around the base of that white oak tree were these tiny little flowers. If any of you are wildflower fans, it's a rue anemone, just a beautiful little. And seeing the purity of that water and the grandness of that tree and the little flowers reminded me of being in the Great Swamp with my father. Just like, I just felt at peace there. And then Monday I went into the office and my job was to sign the contract to purchase the land, which I did. And then the next contract was with the group that would clear cut the entire property, including that giant white oak tree. And then the final contract was with a company that goes in and poisons the soil so that nothing will ever grow there again. The last thing you would want is something like a pesky skunk cabbage pushing its head up through asphalt, right? So, and I signed all those contracts. And as time passed, I was being moved up through the company, eventually became president of one of their divisions. And the further up I got in the company, the more sick I felt. I started getting anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I was depressed. I felt I was getting headaches. And at 3 o'clock in the morning one night, I woke up with this just like a spike being driven through my brain, this headache. And I opened my eyes, and all I could see was double vision. I got a doctor in the front row here, so he's going to tell me. But I was rushed to the hospital, and the doctor said, well, this could be spinal meningitis, an aneurysm, a brain tumor, maybe something else. They said, we don't know what it is, but it's serious, so we're going to do a bunch of tests. And I'm thinking, oh, great. I've just been recently married. I may not be here much longer. They let me out of the hospital while they're waiting for the test results, and I didn't ask permission, but I got in a car and drove down to the coast of Georgia to a little town called St. Mary's. It was a historic fishing place, shrimp boats everywhere. And I got on a boat run by the National Park Service that took me across through this Serengeti of salt marsh, this winding St. Mary's River, out to Cumberland Island, a 17-mile long wilderness island run by the National Park Service, a place that I have always loved. And this is what it looks like. 17 miles of ancient live oak trees that, most trees grow up. The live oak trees grow horizontally. They're big, kind of twisty arms with Spanish moss coming down. And I pitched my tent right behind the dunes so I could hear the surf, the gentle rhythm of the surf as I was sleeping. In the morning, I got up early, watched the first light, the sunrise. I walked all day, saw the extraordinary brown pelicans. They would fly, the six-foot wide wingspan, and they fly like perfect squadrons, just a couple inches above the water. In the evening, I'd watch the sun set, and then I'd lie down and watch the stars, just watch the stars emerge out of the darkness of the great sky. And this is what I did day after day. I just walked and looked and breathed. And after 5 days, I woke up, opened my eyes, my headache was gone, my vision was perfectly clear. There was nothing wrong with me. I've never had a problem with eyesight since. I went back to see the doctors and, for them to tell me the results of all those tests. And they said, okay, you look fine to us, go home. And I haven't had a problem since. So the question of the connection between nature and health has intrigued me from my own personal experience. I don't know what happened on Cumberland Island. I know I love that place. When I got home, my wife said, you're miserable at this job. It's pretty clear. What would you do if you could do anything in the world? And I didn't miss a beat. I'm just thinking about the Great Swamp, and I'm thinking about Cumberland Island, and I said, without hesitation, I said, I would like to use what I know about finance and real estate and use it to save land. And then she said, why don't you just do that? Right? And there was no maneuvering room. I just okay, we're going to do this. I took a 70% pay cut, went to work for a land trust, and learned about the work and the art of local communities like Helen Finsky in the Great Swamp in New Jersey, like the 300 Committee, like the 20-odd land trusts that are here on Cape Cod, and went to work to save land, national parks, forests, rivers, mountains. What a joyous thing to do, and it has felt like just the right calling for me. I want to tie a little history in here because my experience is not the only experience in U.S. history about the connection between health and nature. If you go way back to the 49ers, Galen Clark was an Easterner who came out to California to seek his fortune. Didn't do very well hunting for gold, went to San Francisco, got tuberculosis. His doctor, this was before germ theory and everything, his doctor said, there's nothing I can do for you, but you might do, some people are finding some cure or some solace in going into the High Sierra, to this valley called Yosemite. And so Galen Clark goes there, and as he said, I wrote this down, he said at the time, now it's about 1857 or so, he said, quote, "I went to the mountains to take my chances of dying or growing better, which I thought were about even." So Galen Clark just loves the sequoias and the great redwoods, and he writes to his senator, John Cunha. And John Cunha, and he says, this place is so extraordinary, it's so special, and it saved my life. This should be forever protected. Senator Cunha writes to President Abraham Lincoln, who had other things on his mind in 1864. But can you imagine this? He takes the time, he advances a bill through Congress, the first time the federal government has set aside land permanently for protection, and it was actually a designation to the state of California that these lands would be forever managed for public use, recreation, and shall be inalienable for all time. And that was the birth of the protection of Yosemite, long before anybody conceived of the National Park Service. A few decades later, however, Theodore Roosevelt comes on the scene, another great conservation-minded Republican. He also had severe health problems as a child. He had chronic asthma, he was nearsighted, his boyhood friends all tormented him. He actually wrote in his diary that he viewed himself as a foreordained and predestined victim. And he took solace going into nature, and he found there the comfort and the peace. Eventually, he went to the gym and he buffed up and became an extraordinary specimen and a kind of gung-ho guy. But when he became president, I think it was his sense of indebtedness to nature that had helped him when he was in trouble. That when he became president, he saw to the protection of 5 new national parks, 51 wildlife refuges, 150 national forests, a total of 230 million acres, which is more than any other president has ever done, and this from a Republican. So I stand tall when I go to visit Republicans in the Congress and say, this is your true heritage. Well, 100 years ago, at the time of Galen Clark and his tuberculosis, or at the time of Theodore Roosevelt, who lost his mother to typhus, doctors were worried about infectious diseases, right? They were worried about germs before germ theory, and the great epidemics of the 21st century were all caused, the 20th century prior were caused by germs. Now in the 21st century, public health leaders, including those at the Harvard School of Public Health, view the greatest epidemics as, quote, a pandemic of inactivity, not caused so much by germs as it is by how we are living our lives. Obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, a variety of anxiety and emotional disorders. Children are now spending some 8 hours a day in front of a screen. As you know, they're outdoors half as much time as their parents were. And any of you who read the New York Times or the Boston Globe in the past week, I'm sure are sobered as I was weeping reading about the UN report that we're going to be viewing the loss of 1 million species going extinct over the next several decades unless we turn climate change around. Robert Pyle, a writer, acknowledges the great loss of the extinction of species, but he says, I'm also concerned about the extinction of experience. What does it mean for a kid to grow up and not have woods to play in, or a field to run around, or a stream to explore? A New York Times headline recently announced that sitting is the new smoking. That 4 hours of uninterrupted sitting without getting up and moving around is the equivalent of smoking a half pack of cigarettes in terms of premature mortality. So I know a medical doctor named William Bird, he's based in England, who told me about a conference that he went to, and if there are any doctors here, you know, what often happens, you'll go to a medical conference, you'll sit in the audience and you'll listen to people present papers about various studies. And in this case, William Bird was on the agenda, and the new drug he was advancing is called Fitorex. He says it's a new wonder drug with absolutely no side effects. It can cure depression, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and it can cut in half the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. And every doctor in the room is leaning forward and saying, is this available? Has it been tested by the FDA? You know, when can I start prescribing it? And Dr. Bird then responded that it's already available for any physician who'd like to use it. Fitorex, he told him, was regular aerobic exercise outdoors. So, we all know that something good happens when people are in nature. But now the research is quite extraordinary, and it's telling us actually what is happening. Exposure to nature increases calm, it decreases agitation, it improves concentration, memory, and creative thought. One study by the University of Michigan, Rachel Kaplan concludes that viewing nature in a kind of soft fascination, probably like many of you when you go out for a walk in nature, cause the frontal lobes to rest and reduce stress. In England, researchers found a lower rate of antidepressant prescriptions in neighborhoods that are close to woodlands. And in Netherlands, 44% more people suffered from depression in communities that had the least amount of green space. A whole host of other studies showing the link between time in nature and weight control, faster healing, lower stress. And a friend of mine, Frances Minko, who just won the Heinz Award for her research on ADHD. Her work has been, for any of you who have friends or have children who've struggled with attention issues, it's a heartbreak. So she did a test. She had a control group of adolescents who had been diagnosed with ADHD, who went on a walk down city streets. And then another group went on a walk, also diagnosed with ADHD, went on a walk in a woodland trail. The trees are gently swaying, the ferns are there, the birds are flying from tree to tree, the butterflies, the sun dappling through the leaves. Her conclusion, which has now been published, peer-reviewed and published, is, this doesn't mean it's for everybody, but statistically significant, that a walk in nature for a child diagnosed with ADHD can be the equivalent of a dose of Ritalin at peak effectiveness.
Wow.
Shall I say that again?
Yeah.
Equivalent to a dose of Ritalin at peak effectiveness. So if you're a parent, or you have grandchildren, or you have friends, or you care about the health and well-being of our children, we should be thinking about not just a nice to have. We're going to have a panel where we're going to hear from a minute from somebody from the school system. There are schools around the country that are canceling recess and physical education because we need to concentrate on our test scores. Completely missing the point that a child who's been out running and in nature and sun in their face is going to be psychologically and emotionally more inclined to perform better on tests. So I believe that one of the great gifts that land conservation groups can do to their communities is to make this connection between the well-being of our children, the health of adults, and connection to nature. Well, Anybody know where this is? China. It's Japan, actually. So in Japan, they like to be really well organized. I know I spent a month there, and they insisted I do everything just as they asked. So there's a cultural organization around forest bathing. And they're designated, government-designated forest bathing sites. And on a Saturday, people will come out to the forest bathing site, and there will be a nurse in a white uniform who will take your blood pressure and will give you a test, an attitudinal test. And then you go for your forest bathing, walking through the woods, and 2 hours later you come back, and they do the test over again. And what they find, in average, is there's a 5 to 7% drop in blood pressure and a 53% drop in stress. Pretty impressive. So I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? Why does this work? It shouldn't be such a mystery. There's a Swiss physicist, Nicolas Gislin, who conducted an experiment in Geneva where he separated two twin photons. A photon is the smallest particle of light energy. And those of you who are PhD physicists can correct me on this. I was just a lowly literature major. He separated the twin photons by 7 miles. They had no physical or visual contact. But when one photon changed its polarity, the other matched it instantly, faster than the speed of light, with no contact. What is going on here? Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist, said that anyone who is not shocked by quantum theory has not understood it. Outside the bounds of energy, time, and space, there is a kind of veiled reality that connects everything in the universe. And we are also part of that connection. We see nature has interconnection everywhere. It's just how nature works. The hummingbird will carry pollen from flower to flower for a blue columbine. And the red knot, I've got a picture of red knot. Those of you who are birders, this is one of the great miracles of nature. The red knot has a brain the size of a cashew, actually smaller than a cashew. And yet, somehow it figures out how to go from Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of Chile to Brazil, to the Delaware Bay, lands at the Delaware Bay just as the horseshoe crabs are coming up, laying trillions of eggs, oil, energy-rich eggs. The red knots have now shrunk about half their size. They refuel there and for their final burst up to the Arctic, where they give birth to their young. This is an extraordinary connection between all living things. We see the salmon who knows its way from the Pacific Ocean back to the freshwater stream of its birth. And we too carry this ancient way of knowing. The experience of our ancestors from some 10,000 years ago still echoes in our bones. They, living on the savannah, knew the smell of rain before it fell. It knew the tracks of animals. It knew the pull of the moon and the cycles of the moon. Our DNA, our bodies, the bodies that you are breathing in right now, haven't changed in 10,000 years. This is recent history. And we are still connected with our ancestors who, as anthropologists tell us, walked about 8 to 10 miles every day, slept under the stars, walked under the sun. In 1847, Kierkegaard, the philosopher, wrote this: "Every day I walk myself into a state of well-being and walk away from every illness. I've walked myself into my best thoughts, and I know of no thought so burdensome that one cannot walk away from it. On the other hand, the more one sits still, the pandemic of inactivity, the closer one comes to feeling ill. Thus, if one just keeps walking, everything will be all right." We're just designed to be in relationship with nature. It's just how we are. Walt Whitman once wrote, "Now I see the secret of making the best person. It is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth." Well, this walking in nature is what our own Massachusetts favorite son, Henry David Thoreau, called the tonic of wildness. The tonic is health-giving of wildness. So I believe that we who are in the land conservation world have work to do. I was thrilled to read that the Land Trust down in Birmingham, Alabama, the Freshwater Land Trust, joined forces with their local public health officials to create a metropolitan park system using tobacco settlement funds. Yeah, a 1-2 punch. We're going to deal with obesity, we're going to have an alternative to smoking, and it's going to be funded by the tobacco companies. In Detroit, the Six Rivers Land Trust is partnering with the Henry Ford Hospital System to build therapeutic walking trails around their campuses. Makes perfect sense to me. So with annual healthcare costs soaring now at $2.2 trillion and more, the creation of nearby parks and trails seems to me to be one of the most cost-effective ways that we can stem this epidemic of obesity and diabetes and heart disease. Everybody, of course, wants their children, their family members, to be healthy. And I think this message is just the perfect thing for the 300 Committee and Land Trusts throughout Cape Cod to say this too is why we need to be protecting our local lands. Imagine, if you will, the day when doctors will prescribe a daily dose of vitamin N, a daily dose of nature. And parents will demand that schools provide access to nature. That makes sense. Imagine, if you will, the day when health insurance companies would actually invest in local trails and local parks, because prevention is the lowest cost way to provide for health care. Well, let us all work together for the day when every child in America can grow up within a 10-minute walk of a park or a trail or a natural area. It seems to me that that's simply a moral imperative, that every child, regardless of their background, regardless of where they live, should have the right of that kind of nurturing, health-giving access to nature. So for us tonight, I'd like to offer 3 calls to action. First, get your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors' kids, get them outside, get them outdoors, get them to a local preserve, get them to woods that don't have trails. Second, advocate for this idea of nature close to home, playgrounds around schools, every child within a 10-minute walk. And third, please support the 300 Committee, the sponsors of this event, any of the land trusts that you may be involved with here or maybe where you have a summer home. These are the organizations that are leading the charge. Well, I'd like to close with just a story. We've talked so far about nature and physical health and nature and emotional health, but I'd like to close with a suggestion about nature and spiritual health. My first job when I got out of Yale, much to my father's disappointment, was working with inner city kids that were court referred, and I was doing something like a NOLS or Outward Bound program. We would take kids out into the wilderness area. In this case, we were taking them to the northern wilderness lakes on the border between Canada and Minnesota, the Boundary Waters wilderness. Most of the young men I was working with had been in fights. They'd stolen something, maybe a car, but one who, to protect his identity, I'll just call Sammy, had killed somebody. We're going out for 2 weeks together. After 10 days of paddling, cooking together, washing clothes, washing dishes together, we started to develop some level of trust. And our last night, we were on a peninsula, and the lake was crystal clear. There was no moon in the sky. And I offered to Sammy, I said, what would you think of paddling out to the middle of this lake with the life jacket on, and then just lying down on the bottom of the canoe? And he agreed to do that. It was some risk for him. Well, the stars sparkled like diamonds set in that gauzy white film of the Milky Way. There were dozens of meteorites in late August, and meteorite showers, they streaked across the sky. And then the aurora borealis, with its green and blue ripples, just courses across the sky. And I thought Sammy was not alone on that dark lake. All of the universe cradled him in its vast and forgiving arms. In the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale, there's a copy of the prose works of Ralph Waldo Emerson that John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club, carried with him on his expeditions up and down the peaks of the Sierras. And I saw in that book, on one page, Muir had scribbled in his distinctive penmanship these words. He said, "Between every two pine trees, there is a door leading to a new way of life." Between every two pine trees, there's a door leading to a new way of life. And this, I believe, is the highest purpose of those of us who care about nature and care about the conservation of special places. We reconnect people to the places that bring them life and healing. We remind people of the presence of sacred all around us. And we invite people back home. Thank you.
That was great. Have more out of it again. So, and thanks for telling that story. I was hoping that you would. All right, after these sitting statistics, I feel like we smoked a quarter pack of cigarettes. If anyone wants to stand up right now, just before I introduce Susan Moran, please feel free. I am not kidding. I'm scared. Don't leave, though. Just stand up. Hey. All right, you can stay standing if you want through this, because we're going to maneuver a few people up on the stage, starting with Susan Moran. I'd like to introduce her tonight as the moderator for the panel discussion and the Q&A. Sue is an attorney and mediator specializing in business law, as well as the broker owner of Cape Lifestyle Real Estate. She's the chairman of the Falmouth Board of Selectmen. Probably you all recognize her, but there's many things that I didn't know. She does, I think, everything. The Falmouth delegate to the Cape Cod Assembly, vice chairman of the Falmouth EDIC, and former president of Cape and Island Selectmen and Counselors Association. And I just found out she's also been running an inn for years and has an Airbnb, so if you know people, please let them know. So I'll let you take it over, Sue. Pleasure. Give you this. It's lined.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and to the 300 committee. You know, a lot of us think about Falmouth, and we think how lucky we are because of the lifestyle. That's why a lot of people come. And one of the reasons for that lifestyle is that the 300 committee thought long ago how important it would be to start really collecting and protecting the land. And just having this talk in this forum, you know, it's like they're going to take that and put it on a springboard, and they're going to share it with the community, and in talking about, you know, healthy living and what you really can do if you just, you know, wash it all over you, like the the forest in Japan. And so I'm just really, it's one of, just another reason to be proud of being from Falmouth. I'm here, of course, I know many of you, and so glad to see you. I'm going to introduce our guests. We have 4 gentlemen coming up. If you come and take your seats, I'm going to just speak a little bit about each of you. First, we have Dr. Kumara Siddhartha, who is the Medical Director for the Physician Hospital Organization and Accountable Care Organization of Cape Cod. Additionally, he's also Medical Director of Cape Cod Healthcare Employee Health Plan. Dr. Siddhartha is also a graduate of the Master of Public Health in Nutrition at the School of Public Health and Department of Nutrition at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and certified in plant-based nutrition by Cornell University. He's pursued biological medical training and nutrition-centered natural therapeutic philosophy. He works hard to educate the public about plant-based food and its interconnectedness to human and planetary health. Thank you very much for being here. We next, and this is, I'll try to do a little bit in order here. Directly to my right, we have Tarungaya, a freshman at Falmouth Academy who is interested in environmental science. He's also a sailor, skier, and swimmer. Welcome. Next we have Next we have Mark Robinson, Executive Director of the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trust. And that's been since its founding in 1986. He's previously worked in regional government on coastal management and water quality issues, and served as chairman of the Barnstable Conservation Commission, also vice chair and treasurer of the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition, and vice president of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. He currently serves as the governor's appointee to the Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Committee, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has acknowledged Robinson's work with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009. And furthest to the right, we have Dr. Gary Simpson, who's right at home here. He's a school psychologist for Falmouth Public Schools and has spent many years as a pediatric neuropsychologist working with young children and families. Welcome all the gentlemen. It's up. Please applause. So for this part of the program, we'd like to take some questions from the audience, and just so everyone can hear the question, if you have a particular panelist that you'd like to direct it to, please let me know that, and what I'll try to do is repeat the question so that everyone can hear. So just raise your hand if anybody has a particular interest for one of these gentlemen. Please.
We wanted them to share, each has commentary.
Oh, so you want them to start left to right? Okay. Commentary and then questions. I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry. Would you like to go first? You know what? Yeah. All right, we'll just juggle.
Check.
All right, we're back. I'm Tarungaya. I'm originally from Alaska. I live in Cape Cod and Falmouth all year round, and sailor, swimmer, very active person. And just like Mr. Wentworth, I have an interesting story to tell about myself. So about 2 years ago, it was a summer, I was at leadership camp, and sadly one morning I woke up after a long day, and I couldn't get out of bed. And come to find out, the reason I couldn't get out of bed is when I was at Children's talking to my doctor, I had fractured my L4. just overuse injury, common thing if you don't pay attention, which I sadly did to my body. And it really put me down for that summer because I really wanted to do a lot of things, go out and have fun, and I'm stuck on the couch, which wasn't very fun. And I started to learn that being on the couch wasn't very fun very quickly, as I started playing more video games, watching a whole lot of Netflix, which is great, until it's really not. And I generally wasn't as happy as I could have been that summer. And thank goodness for my grandmother who brought me back to Alaska where she lives. And after that summer, those 2 weeks I spent in Alaska, going back, went out just as many places as I could, taking long walks in the woods, going out fishing, going on the water, and seeing all the amazing wildlife and all the amazing things you could see in Alaska. And understanding that, hey, this is so much better than being on the couch watching Netflix all day. Like, what was I doing all summer? And it really comes to show that being outside, being active, is really so much better for you than just sitting down all day thinking about, oh man, I hurt, should I take some more ibuprofen? What am I doing? And it was a really nice revelation to see that going outside, being active and thinking about what you're doing and how you're part of the world really made me feel better. And didn't save me, didn't fix my back, but it sure was such a wonderful experience. And it really enlightened me. It made me feel a lot better mentally. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I do have a few slides I'm going to click through and see if I can find mine. Oh, there you go. Okay, so it's going to be a tough act to follow those two speakers after that. I'm going to try. So, in my world, in the healthcare world, we are realizing how significant it is to understand the role that our guests in our bodies play. And what I meant is that you might have heard of these terms, gut bacteria, microbiome. They have different terms they use for those good bacteria that are in our gut, in our intestines. And it's astounding to realize that if you just look at the genetic makeup, the genes, more than 95% of the genes in our body is not ours. It's the bacteria's genes. So that is basically, in other words, you can flip it and look at it as we are the guests and they are the hosts. And then we are realizing now in healthcare how the use of antibiotics, which is necessary in certain situations, but it needs to be used in a very stringent manner. We are realizing that. Otherwise, we lead to killing off those good bacteria, like the same way that you will kill off the microorganisms in the soil if you're using pesticides and herbicides. So I always see an analogy between what we do to the earth and what we do to us. And there's a garden out there, and there's a garden inside us. And so how we, there's so much analogy we can look at in every aspect. And it also goes into, if you look at the food additives, they also affect the gut bacteria. And so that's just an example of, and we are still trying to fully understand how much these bacteria play a role in many diseases, including heart attacks, including immunological diseases, asthma, and so forth. And even in infants, for example, now we know that infants who are breastfed, when the infant just came into the world, and from a very sterile, clean environment, and when they're breastfed, they get exposed to the bacteria in the skin, and those infants' gut bacteria grows into a better balance, and they have less risk of inflammatory diseases and diseases in the adulthood compared to kids who were not breastfed. The same thing applies for birth. The kids that are born in a cesarean section in a more sterile way, they have higher risk when they grow up in terms of inflammatory diseases. Again, the exposure to bacteria actually helps us in that sense. So the more we are in a sterile environment, staying away from nature, in whatever way we look at it, it's just going to be less strengthening for us. I just have a couple of slides. So this is a slide that looks at biodiversity loss using different indexes that are used globally to look at the species count. And historically, looking at from 1970 to 2010, there is a trend of dropping in the biodiversity. At the same time, during the same period, you see an epidemic of increase in asthma and allergic rhinitis. This was published in one of the environmental journals. So that's a correlation study. So I'm into research, and we always look at what type of how strong the research evidence is. This is a correlation study, but it's still pretty powerful when you look at the timing of it. And we also now understand that loss of natural environments leads to this lack or deprivation of the good bacteria, as well as not having clean air. They both contribute to a lot of changes in the immune system in the body and change in the gut bacteria, which leads to a lot of inflammation and a high risk for inflammatory diseases. And EPA clearly says how Americans on an average spend 90% of their time indoors, where in indoors the concentration of some pollutants are 2 to 5 times higher than the outdoor. If you really think about it, and it's not a big science, right? You think about the air that's out there, which can be diluted because of the amount of air out there, compared to an indoor air, which is contained, and the pollution is going to be more based on the concentration inside, because there's nothing more to dilute it, right? So you don't even have to have a lot of scientific studies to think about it. And this is it's a lot of data that's out there, but basically showing what a wonderful speaker already shared today, that across the board in many systems, however you look at wellness, whether it is body, whether it's mind, whether it is social well-being, whether it is economic well-being or spiritual well-being, across the board there are benefits to interacting with nature. And there's such a long list on how we know now about decrease in heart disease, increased longevity, decreased mortality, with regard to anxiety, depression, increased attention, which actually leads to decreased crime rates. They have found in one study looked at city of Chicago. They found that in areas where there are more green spaces, there was, on surveys, the attention span was higher, which led to less anxiety, and the crime rate was less in those areas only. Again, a correlation study. Productivity goes up, social cohesion increases, crime rate goes up, and if you're gardening is one of the things that has been shown to actually increase longevity, but it also can be a food supply, can be an economic source, and spiritual inspiration has also been shown to be increased. So I think I just want to say that in many areas, whether we take it from the smallest organism, bacteria, to looking at a giant sequoia tree, in every area we see it, interaction with nature helps us from a health perspective. And I can answer more questions if you want.
I guess I have a slide here too. Some of you know who that particular friend is of mine. Her name is Ellie. And Ellie saved my life. That's a little overstating it, but in a difficult time that I was going through about 3 years ago when I got her as a puppy, we started taking walks. And we walk every day, and I mean every day. Rain, snow, sleet, or heat. About an hour and a half, 3 miles, 3.5, 4 miles. This is a 4-mile walk at the Quashnet River. And Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. I say,
If you want to get outside every single day, get a dog. But what it's really instilled in me is a great love of walking, which I didn't really have before. I know I ramble, but I didn't really set out to do a lot of walking until I tried to get this dog tired out, and it's really hard. The 3 miles became 4 miles. In any case, I'm here to praise walking. We have here in the audience a woman who is recently honored in Falmouth, Vicki Lowell. She's the mother of the Cape Cod Pathways program, which was an idea that she and a couple of county commissioners had back in the early 90s to create this interlinked walking trail system throughout the Cape. And we did a lot of planning. It's been very hard to implement, to actually make the connections all the way across Cape. But there are certain towns where you can walk from stem to stern through the woods, crossing occasional roads. This is Cape Cod, after all. And that's an incredible thing to be able to do in a place that has developed as rapidly as Cape Cod has in the last 50 years, and we all have seen it. The rise of the land trust, the land conservation movement on the Cape, is in direct response to the anxiety that people felt, particularly at the height of the development boom in the 1980s, that we were going to lose everything here on the Cape. And if it wasn't for the concerted effort of groups like the 300 Committee, the Salt Pond Areas Bird Sanctuary, and all of the land trusts throughout the Cape, working with their open space committees, working with state agencies, to put together this mosaic of open space that is now available not just for habitat, not just for water protection, not just for scenic beauty, but to get our people out on the land. I want to ask my doctor friends here, what is it about ticks? We have educated people about ticks so well here on the Cape, we have scared people out of the woods. I get bit by ticks all the time. I've only had 2 bouts, okay, and they were cured, as far as I can tell. And I don't mean to belittle the disease, it's a terrible disease, and we all have seen or heard instances of it, but not to the point where we are afraid to go in the woods. There are precautions to take. How are we going to get healing powers of nature if people are afraid to go in the woods? Because of these tiny little things, they're so hard to see. So take it from somebody who walks a lot. You can't be afraid of the woods. Take precautions and get out there. I wanted to just give a few quotes from my hero, Henry David Thoreau. In addition to Walden and his Cape Cod book, he had a long essay called Walking. It was in praise of getting out, and he was the ultimate walker. And I came across this, I put up this photo up because he has this great sentence. I love to see domestic animals reassert their native rights, any evidence that they have not wholly lost their original wild habits and vigor. As a dog that's enjoying the original wild habits and vigor. Just, these are little excerpts from a very long essay, but to quote, I have met with but 1 or 2 persons in the course of my life who understand the art of walking, that is, of taking walks, who had a genius, so to speak, for sauntering, which word is beautifully derived from idle people who roved about the country in the Middle Ages. The saunterers were the people who said, I'm on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, Saint Terre, the Holy Land. So that's where that came from. It is true, we are but faint-hearted walkers nowadays who undertake no persevering, never-ending enterprises. Our expeditions are but tours, and come round again at evening to the old hearthside from which we set out. Half the walk is but retracing our steps. I think I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day at least, and it is commonly more than that, sauntering through the woods and over the hills and fields, absolutely free from all worldly engagements. The walking of which I speak has nothing in it akin to taking exercise, as it is called, as the sick take medicine at stated hours, as the swinging of dumbbells or chairs. Apparently they didn't have Gold's Gym back then, and to swing chairs for exercise. But the walking itself is the enterprise and the adventure of the day. The walking is the enterprise and adventure of the day for Henry Thoreau. My vicinity affords many good walks, and though for so many years I've walked almost every day and sometimes for several days together, I have not yet exhausted them. An absolutely new prospect is a great happiness, and I can still get this any afternoon. 2 or 3 hours walking will carry me to as strange a country as I ever expect to see. I am alarmed when it happens that I've walked a mile into the woods bodily without getting there in spirit. It sometimes happens that I cannot easily shake off the village. The thought of some work will run in my head, and I am not where my body is. I am out of my senses. What business have I here in the woods if I am thinking of something outside the woods? So I think that these kind of quotes, I think what he's getting at is that it's not just the exercise of the walking, although that's important. It's the being in the woods and being in the moment. I have a friend in Mashpee, a Wampanoag elder, Ramona Peters, some of you may know. And her idea of leading a walk is 100 yards into the woods, very slowly, stopping, feeling the roots under your feet, absorbing the whole experience. That to her is a walk as well. And you can do just as well walking those 100 yards if you are in the moment in the woods as you can doing my 4-mile walk with this wild animal.
I think what I'll do is talk a little bit about how I ended up getting up on the stage or being part of a representative for town. And I just want to clarify, I'm a school psychologist for the Falmouth Schools, and I'm based at Mullen Hall, and I work with the preschool program there as well. So, you know, as a neuropsychologist working with kids and adolescents, I do, you know, I'm trained to look at brain systems, brain behavior relationships, how students process information, access curriculum. And I do enjoy that aspect of my job of counseling students or working with them through testing to identify where did things break down? Where's this process falling apart? All the kids that we work with really want to succeed in schools. You just have to give them really a game they can win, you know, and you have to figure out what the barriers are that are stopping them from getting there. But over time, I've become more interested as well in foundational factors involved with children. And by those, I mean things like sleep, diet, physical exercise, and of course, access or exposure to the outdoors. And I did my work up at University of Minnesota, did a doc and postdoc there, and one of the faculty members was asked by a local school system, can you come out and help us? They wanted, around the time of their MCAS exams for Minnesota, they wanted to do a enriched diet in school. They wanted to run it for 3 or 4 weeks before the testing and figure out from a neuropsych perspective, does this increased, you know, enhanced diet, you know, help with processing speed, reasoning, etc. So Kathy Jordan, the faculty member there, did the research for the school committee, and what do you know? Found with an improved diet that kids were processing information better, etc. Presented the results to the school committee. We're all very, very excited, as were the school committee, and they remained excited, not so much for us, because they came back at the end, they said, you know, because of this research, every year around test time, we're going to have 3 weeks of that enhanced diet. We said that really wasn't the point, but anyway. I do want to say there's been a lot in Falmouth, at least the schools that I've been involved with, in looking at these foundational factors and trying to figure out how to work with them as students. And Nancy Ashworth, the building principal at Mullen Hall, has been amazing in letting us kind of implement different programs and looking at their outcomes and effectiveness. One of the things we've done is there's an exercise group at Mullen Hall, run by the gym teacher for students with ADHD, that they do 20 minutes of exercise 5 days a week when they first come into the building at the start of the day, and then go into their classes. And the feedback we get from teachers is extremely positive. We kind of look at how are the teachers seeing this, how are the students seeing this, how are the the parents viewing it. It provides folks with another alternative to medication, or perhaps an adjunct to medication. But again, we find that extra movement is really, really important and well received by the students, the parents, and the staff. In addition, for all the students in the building at Mullen Hall, they have 2 exercise periods a day. So it's really nice when you hear nationally and read about other systems that are shrinking recess time for test scores, that there's an understanding from the administration of, no, we need to go the opposite direction, increase that time. And the space we have in front of the building and behind the building is awesome. We have the pond behind there, new playground, and hopefully grass, for those of you guys who are watching that whole project. A lot of the teachers take the kids for walks around the community, walks around the pond. The physical exercise we're using, again, as an adjunct, and we started becoming interested in dietary things as well. And you guys know Andrew Burns is the new food service director, starting to make some changes to the food, the things coming out of the cafeteria, which is awesome. This year, I took 2 students from William James College. We typically have students come down and train with us for a year. It keeps us abreast of kind of developments in the field, and just a good situation all the way around. Gives us an extra insight, etc. Keeps me on my toes, certainly. The 2 students we have this year are Carolyn Duvall, who's from William James College, and she's in their she's a school psychology intern completing her training. And then we also have Megan Silva, who's a doctoral level practicum student who's with us. And the 2 of them were trained in the Reebok program. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. This fall, and 2 days a week they go down to our Y before school program. They pull the students up to the gym, exercise with them for about 20 minutes. And Andrea Burns was also awesome for all the students who are involved in that program. While they're enrolled, there's access to a salad bar. So the elementary school has a salad bar. We take the kids in and say, I'm amazed at kids' inability at times to identify food sources, but one of the questions, you guys are all past that point on the IQ test, this is for young kids, but one of the vocabulary ones is a picture of a pear. And I've noticed over time, kids increasingly unable to identify, a fruit that I consider pretty mainstream. So it's great taking them down there and just giving them taste of these different vegetables on a salad bar, going, see, this green stuff doesn't taste that bad. From there, really, the outdoor piece for me has become more interesting over time. I was an Eagle Scout, a Boy Scout, growing up, love the outdoors, love to get out, camp, etc. What we're noticing more and more, and I don't want to completely bash technology, because we're, as educators, we need to, and I guess, distinguish between educational, recreational uses of technology. So we want, from an educational perspective, students being able to navigate technology, to understand, etc. And even for recreational, at some points, some of the kids on the Xbox, that's the electronic, corner of the street that we used to hang around on ourselves growing up. But we are seeing more and more kids who binge, I would say, on electronics on weekdays and on the weekend. And what we're noticing is that on Monday, there's particular children now that we have check-ins right at the start of the day. We work with the parents. We indicate to them this is probably not a good idea, but we have kids coming in after maybe 12 hours a day, maybe 24, count Friday night, maybe 30, 35 hours of electronics. And getting them to engage is very, very difficult. There's a real withdrawal that goes on. There's an irritability. And also, a lot of the kids who are drawn to the electronics tend to, my perception is, tend to have attention regulation issues themselves, and it ends up that this exposure weakens that very muscle that's already weak in the first place. Combined with that, the interest in the outdoors comes from me as a psychologist in that the Connect program, which for us is a program that goes through the district, elementary to high school, serving students with social emotional disabilities, will be coming to Mullen next year as part of the program there. And one of the things I've noticed in working with those students over time is I talked to some of the kids. One of the students was telling me, I've never been to the beach. And this is I think a second or third grade student. I was looking at him going, good God, you live on a sandbar. But it tends to be, that tends to be the case. So I've spoken with Joan Woodward, who's our new director of special ed, director of pupil personnel. And she's going to, with the program there, she's going to have us make available a van to us and allow us to take those kids out and expose them to the outdoors, teach them mastery type things, etc. And there was a great article in Outside Magazine looking at veterans coming back from the war with post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a program in California outside San Diego, and they're teaching them how to surf, just being outdoors, mastery of the environment. And it really resonated with me. And it's the same thing I want to do for some of our kids. Obviously, outdoor exposure, anxiety, depression, PTSD. We know with the opiate crisis that we have in town that a lot of kids have significant trauma exposure. In fact, the elementaries group at Mullen, there's actually Wendy Risco, the school counselor, runs a memories group for students who have adult, parents, caregivers who've passed away. So, this is the population that we're dealing with and managing, and really, I see, when I wanted to thank, I guess, Susie Goodman and Jessica Rittenauer for getting me involved with, or asking me to be on the panel, but I really saw an opportunity to look at how can we, as a school system, generally, but more specifically for me at Mullen Hall, how can we use nature, the outdoors, this exposure for these children as part of their treatment? Just like we do physical activity for ADHD, outdoor exposure, same as the dietary as well. So I'm happy to answer your questions, but thank you for giving me a chance.
I'm going to not use the mic so we don't have competition. I'm sure everyone can hear. Questions, please.
This is for Dr. Siddhartha. Given your role at Cape Cod Healthcare, what would your advice be for us in trying to share this message? I think this is pretty much the choir here. With sort of people who can really make change. Rand talked about the insurance companies and healthcare providers. So what's a good next step to try and start to really make those connections?
Good question. So I would say, from a health perspective, there are so many benefits in so many systems in the body, and it will be, I think, good to understand what matters to them. In other words, I think the answer is, I don't have a fixed answer for that. I would approach in any way, like if we are dealing with any patients, we would first want to find out what matters to them in terms of their health, and then try to understand their world and what their priorities are, what their needs are, and then share information in a way that matches their need or where they are in their world, and try to kind of meet them where they are. I don't know if it makes sense, and it could be, it could be basic things, but generally Many of the illnesses that we deal with today are rooted in inflammation, chronic inflammation. Inflammation is basically a body's way of reacting to any insult. Sometimes it's sudden and abrupt. If you fall down and hit your knee, it can have a bump, and that's an inflammation. For an insult, which is a physical injury. If somebody gets a bronchitis, that's an inflammation. The insult is a virus there. So, but then on a regular basis, we build up slowly inflammation over years, and that leads to diabetes, arthritis, dementia, heart attacks, other immune diseases. So if the person you're meeting has any one of those issues they're dealing with, you can start the conversation with how inflammation and gut bacteria are connected, and bring that conversation to nature. That's a way to start.
Thank you very much. Please.
Sharon? I love your advice on your age group, your generation, to help them to connect with nature and connect with land trusts. And what advice do you have for us?
Get off your phone. I'm serious. Even myself as a teenager. Oh, thank you so much. I struggle with it too. I know. I've been born into it. Most of the people in the audience, I assume, were watching the internet become what it has become. And now that we've seen people that have been born into it and immersed into it, you can see the positives and the negatives of it. This rapid access to all the information in the world. It's amazing. Wikipedia, Google, it's getting me through school. I mean, all these places where I get information for school, it's so wonderful. But then we have social media, which is a great thing. It's just moderation. And I see some people that don't take it into moderation. And some people, which sadly I think, have developed either addictions or dependencies on the internet, on this rapid interaction between other people. And just, I think if people took a break, connected, in my story about my life, I took a 2-week hiatus off of this Netflix and video game binge for a summer when I broke my back. And it really brought me back down to earth and centered myself. So I think if we all did that in some sort of way, it'd be great for everybody, not just people my age, just people in general.
Right, so take a breath.
I might just mention that all the land trusts that I work with, we're very good at creating a calendar of events and telling people, come on our walk. But the other way is to go to them and offer a walk to other groups. So we haven't done a great job at that. Rent a guide, okay? Rent a guide program, any kind of civic group, Boy Scout, after school program, whatever, could call up the land trust and say, can you send a volunteer to take us around Long Pond for the afternoon? Free. And you know what? There are people that would love to lead walks. They just love to tell everything they know to other people, and so I think making our calendar of events a little more less passive, waiting for people to come to us.
That's another way to get to know Falmouth. Make it part of an offering, part of, tourism, nature. Great idea. Anyone else? Wonderful life there. Please.
I have a question for Dr. Siddhartha. Thank you for a very interesting talk. Do you think that being outdoors exposes us to bacteria that's beneficial for our immune system or gut bacteria, either from dirt or farm animals or something else?
Yeah, I think definitely, if we are in too much of a sterile environment, where there is no bacteria, and that is not healthy, we know that. So having a reasonable amount of exposure to the soil bacteria, touching the dirt is such a good thing. It's such a good thing at so many levels for the body and the mind and the spirit. So, and that is, the gut bacteria is the bacteria in the soil, when they accidentally get into the body, it allows to rebuild the bacterial content in a positive way. I think before, from a public health point of view, in those days when we did not have the sanitary revolution, that was a problem, right? So now we have very good, strict public codes on where the sanitation aspect is taken care of from the household sewage. So that is not an issue today, so we need to not worry about that when we touch the earth and the soil. So it is such an important thing. And I just want to mention, when I have the opportunity, that with regard to prescribing walking, Cape Cod Healthcare is dabbling for the past few years into that a little bit, where our cardiology program has a Healthy Parks, Healthy People program, which is a prescription given in our cardiac rehab program to patients through a collaboration with the National Seashore Association for a guided walks there. So patients can get that when they go through the program. It's not widespread, it's limited to the cardiology program at this point, but it's a start.
Questions?
You know, I just was thinking, Dr. Simpson, in terms of passing it forward and looking at our children, our schools, compared to the demands with testing, MCAS, the demands on the educators, what would you prescribe for the administration to kind of get this, wellness in nature opportunity for our kids?
It's a great question. I think part of what you do as you grow older is what you're exposed to when you're younger. So I think really what we need to think about is just exposing kids to the outdoors. There's mindfulness training that goes on in the schools. There's a garden behind Mullen Hall where there's a sensory garden where the kids can go through and touch and smell different things. They grow different vegetables, etc. There's a teacher hired who's part of the curriculum, in the school. But I really think you do, as you get older, what you remember from when you were younger. And I think Rand's story, some of the stories pointed that out earlier. And I think that's what we really need to be doing for a lot of these kids, particularly those from more disadvantaged backgrounds where they don't, for a variety of reasons, have the ability to get out to the parks, etc., and to the public grounds. And I think, given what we know about mental health and exposure, physical activity, you look at Bradley Hospital has the We Move program now for kids with bipolar disorder. We look at, in Boston, there's a multi-sensory site, multi-site study that looked at just basic foundational factors in mental health and being able to slow or not have bipolar schizophrenia fully manifest due to basic factors. So I think I drifted a little on the question, but I guess I would say exposing the kids when they're young to these sort of things is the best thing that we can do as educators.
Thank you. And Taryn, just the other end of that for high school age kids, what would you suggest?
The same, just get outside. I know how stressful it can be as a high schooler, being one, but I also know how stressful it can be for adults too, because they have to deal with high schoolers like us. But seriously, getting outside, I remember Ms. Klein and I, who was here yesterday, went out to the Little Sippawisset March, and we just walked around, put on our waders, and waited around for an hour, and it was amazing. Because some people were like getting wet, having a great time. Some people were digging up whatever they could find and just interacting and getting out of the classroom, which was such a nice experience, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Klein.
Stand up if you would. Thank you, easier to hear.
Basically, what I'm thinking about is the idea that you guys are needs to connect. It's got to do with like, like polarity and just where you are in the planets. So all human beings naturally actually need to be connected to the ground, to the earth, the soil, the grass. But not only that, studies have shown now, and I can't name them specifically, but maybe you all can, that we all know that trees take what we don't need. They breathe in what we breathe out. And we breathe in what they breathe out, which is oxygen. But not only do they do that, they also emit, not antibodies, but what would you call it? They emit a kind of a gas that helps heal and make human beings healthy. And it's part of nature. It's something that they're really looking into now. And if we know this, and so therefore being in a forest where you're basically immersing yourself in that kind of a biodiverse experience is so healing and important to the body. Why isn't this being taught? I'm a preschool teacher, okay? And I try to teach my students these things. I love you telling me that it's okay for them to play in the dirt because, you let them play in the dirt. Just the dirt. Like, well, they've got all sorts of things that they think they're doing, but a lot of people think that that's dirty, it's just pointless, and it's just,
Great question.
we're wasting their time. But if you could, maybe, if you know anything about those things, it would be
Dr.
appreciated.
Siddhartha, you were talking about the importance of, getting your hands on the land.
I mean, thank you. So, what you're alluding to, I think, with regard to earthing is there is some science understanding about the electromagnetism that we have inside the body in our cells. So every cell, every tissue has, electricity and positive and negative that maintains things. In the same way that the earth has an electromagnetism, and I think there is some correlation with that. Some studies have looked at it. But in a way, and I don't think we really need scientific studies to understand it. We just need to get out and feel it, and that's the best study we can do.
And that reminds me of what you were saying, Mark, and just in terms of the benefits of just getting out there and walking, just the mindfulness of it.
Yes, and as I said, I think that whether it's exercise or mindfulness, it's just being out the doors that is the important thing. I grew up in the suburbs, and we came down every weekend to the Cape just to be outdoors and to go to the beach, to dig a clam out of the flats, to just get out and do that stuff. And it's what drew me to the Cape after college. That this is still a place where Cape Codders, whether you're born here or by inclination have moved here, you're most at home when you're out of doors.
It's a great point.
So, I just wanted to add, every one of you alluded to something, and when I work with some of the school kids here, taking them on field trips, one of the things I say to them right away is, you want to use all your senses when you're here, and you've all alluded to that. What you smell, what you feel, you mentioned this, what you hear, and be in the moment there. What is surrounding you? And it's amazing how the kids pick up. And the other thing for me, I love these field trips because I always say, you have 30 kids and you have 30 sets of eyes and ears and senses, and when they see something exciting, they can share it with everyone else. So I couldn't agree more. I'm more, I am a scientist, but on this I'm more qualitative than quantitative. But I was up today leading a group, and after they left, I had a half an hour and I stayed out just by myself. And I said, why
Thank you for sharing that. And I would say this again, the more we delve into science and try to understand it, the more we realize how inadequate the current scientific methods we have to really understand nature and our connections to that. So I think at some point we just needed to let go and just feel it and get it that way. And that's, yeah, it's and then maybe if we have time, I would like to hear from others too, and we don't want to be the experts.
Absolutely, in the back, please.
My question is, we all know that getting outdoors is what we need to do. So what I would ask you, each panel member here, is what are the barriers? What is stopping students, us, from getting outside and enjoying these benefits?
I mean, I mentioned this hypersensitivity to the ticks, Lyme disease, and I don't want to be seen as somebody who belittles it. But I think the analogy is with the sterile environments that the doctor is talking about. How we've kind of gone, the pendulum has swung way back too far the other way, and it's hysteria about some of these things. And I think that understanding risks and taking precautions should be sufficient to not have people be scared of the woods. Okay. Now we're going to have a hysteria about sharks in the ocean, right? So we're learning how to adapt and find ways to coexist and still be able to enjoy the ocean. But it's a learning curve. But I just hope that the pendulum doesn't swing the other way so far that now nobody's going to go in the ocean anymore. The media does a lot of that hysterical fear mongering, I think.
Kind of good to get back before this to, be a little more simple before things got so complicated. You've all been really terrific, wide variety of interests and viewpoints, and it's benefited everyone in the audience. We thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the 300 committee, Salt Pond, everybody that participated, folks in the audience, Leonard, Jessica, Kate, this has been one of a kind, really avant-garde, and just really a springboard to what's coming. So thank you all as well.
I had prepared last remarks, but I think we've had plenty, and you've heard lots of great things. And we just have some things that we'd like to give to our guests today. And we should have Rand come up as well. Rand, could you come up and join us too, please?
This is Best Sportsman in Nature of Cape Cod, which is a wonderful resource. That was a member of the 300 Committee Board of Directors.
So thank you again, all of you, for joining us.